Chapter 3382. Rice Worm was still looking at Lin Cece. She still couldn't figure it out. Lin Cece scoffed. Just as she was about to speak, Rice Worm spoke up weakly. I can be your housekeeper, take care of a child or something. Lin Cece knocked her head. You need someone to take care of you. How dare you say you want to take care of my child? I think it's more convenient for you to call me Mom. Bai Shuali stuck out her tongue and kept quiet. Lin Cece looked outside. It was drizzling and the night sky was dark. After a long silence, she stretched. All right, go to bed early. Wait on me tomorrow morning. Rice Worm's face flushed red. I don't want to. You said you wanted to wait on me. Have you forgotten? Lin Cece looked at her and laughed. Bai Shuali covered her head with the quilt. I'm going to bed. Lin Cece looked at her curling up like a turtle and couldn't help but laugh. She went over and pulled the quilt. Rice Worm wrapped herself tightly in the quilt. Lin Cece laughed. Aren't you afraid of suffocating? It's none of your business. Rice Worm's voice was soft. Lin Cece shook her head and walked out. Actually, Bai Shuali had the temper of a child. She paused. She suddenly remembered that she was like this in the past. Actually, every girl was a child. It just depended on whether someone was willing to spoil them. Without someone to spoil them, they had to do everything by themselves. Bai Shuali still had someone who was willing to spoil her. Lin Cece smiled and left. When Bai Shuali heard the sound of the door closing, she quietly got up. The room was dark. She looked at Xiao Bai and took him out of the box. She murmured, Xiao Bai, I saw your father. He came to look for me. Her voice was soft and a little silly. But I don't want to go home with him. I'm angry. With that, her voice was choked. Xiao Bai, am I stupid? I'd rather stay here. She laid on her knees slowly and looked at Xiao Bai in her palm. She blinked gently. She didn't want to think about it. Her mind was filled with tonight's situation and Yi Mulan's words. I don't want to go back, she muttered, repeating it over and over. On the other hand, Yi Mulan had returned to his apartment. His body was slightly wet, so he went to take a shower. When he took off his clothes, he could still smell a unique scent on his body. He frowned, sniffed, and then threw all the clothes into the trash can. It was obvious that he had the scent of a brother. But when he came out of the shower, he couldn't help but pick up the clothes. After looking at them for a long time, he still washed them. Although it was late at night, he did not go to sleep immediately. Instead, he stood in front of the French window. From this direction, he could see the direction of Lin Cece's apartment. Although it was far away, he felt a little relieved just by standing there and looking. He stood there for the whole night. It was not until early in the morning that he realized it was already dawn. The auntie opened the door and came in. Seeing him standing there, she said with a faint smile, Lawyer Yi, good morning. Yi Mulan pursed his lips and faintly pulled out an extremely faint smile. Chapter 3383. I found her, Yi Mulan said hoarsely. The aunt opened her mouth in surprise and walked to the door of the master bedroom. Oh, you're back. Let me see if you've lost weight. There was no one at the door, and the bed was neatly arranged. It didn't look like someone had slept in it. The aunt suddenly turned around. Where is she? Yi Mulan frowned. She wants to stay outside for a while. The aunt looked at him suspiciously. We've been apart for so long. Doesn't she miss you? Then the aunt started to complain. It said that the head of the bed quarrels with the end of the bed. You have to bring the wife back and coax her. Yi Mulan smoked and raised his eyebrows, looking at the aunt. The aunt seemed to be experienced, but she blushed. You know what I mean. Just sleep with her for one night. Yi Mulin's thoughts drifted away. Just sleep with her for one night. He had slept with Shirley last night, in the car. But it was only for a minute or less. So she was not satisfied with him. Did she think that was all he could do? Yi Mulin smoked calmly, but his face wasn't calm anymore. He felt that he should make it clear that he couldn't bear such a crime. But it was still troublesome with Lin Cece. As he was thinking, the ant pushed him. Lawyer Yi. Yi Mulin came back to himself and smiled. What's up? When are you going to bring the wife back? The ant looked worried. Yi Mulin suddenly said, I'll give you her number. Call her and ask her to come back to get the things. Tell her that you can't enter the master bedroom. She has the key. He gave her number to the ant. It was Lin Cece who told him. The ant looked at him suspiciously and said slowly, Lawyer Yi, don't lie to me. They say that people in the city are cunning. Do you want to trick Shirley back instead of apologizing? Let me tell you, men can't do that. No. No. These two words pierced deeply into Yi Mulin's heart. He took a deep breath, looked at the ant and said word by word, I'll prove that I can do it. Then he went to take a shower. The ant was confused and then realized, did Lawyer Yi have something that was hard to say about men, so he felt so inferior? Not confident. The more the auntie thought about it, the more she felt that it was possible. After thinking for a while, she secretly added some nutritious food to today's meal. It was the good stuff she brought from her hometown, but she never had the chance to eat it. Now was the time for her to show off her skills. Husband and wife life, love life, especially nightlife, sex life, this was a must-have medicine. The auntie happily prepared a sumptuous meal for Yi Mulin early in the morning. When he came out, he was quite speechless. He looked at the auntie and said, I don't have a woman, I don't need this. That's right. Only after the supplement can there be a woman. The upright ant felt that her logic wasn't wrong, so she said smilingly. Yi Mulin couldn't help but sigh, I'm fine, both physically and mentally. The auntie was still in a good mood and said, young people are under a lot of pressure at work. It's normal for them to feel powerless. They'll be fine after some rest. He didn't want to go against the auntie's good intentions, and most importantly, he didn't want to listen to her nagging, so he ate the deer antler porridge, but as soon as he got into the car, his nose started to bleed profusely. Drop by drop, it dripped onto his trousers. It was a ghastly sight. Chapter 3384. He frowned and dialed Secretary Lee's number. Cancel all my plans for today. No, I'll cancel all my plans for this week. Secretary Lee was shocked. What was wrong with her boss? When she asked, Yi Mulin's voice was very calm. Go to the hospital. Secretary Lee was even more shocked. After a long time, she coughed lightly. Is it serious? Yi Mulin said indifferently, he's suffering from excessive internal heat and has a nosebleed. Hearing this, Secretary Lee suggested in a low voice, is it because Mrs. Yi hasn't been home for a long time? Should we ask her to come back? Maybe Lawyer Yi won't be suffering from excessive internal heat. How did everyone know that Lawyer Yi was going to divorce? The cleaner saw a lot of printed divorce agreements in Lawyer Ye's wastepaper basket. However, the colleagues in the law firm only dared to discuss it in a low voice and didn't dare to ask Lawyer Yi. But now, Lawyer Yi was suffering from excessive internal heat because he didn't have a wife. How uncomfortable it was. After Secretary Lee said this, Yi Mulin's face was completely black. After a while, he asked with a dark face, do you talk about me like this behind my back? Secretary Lee coughed lightly. Absolutely not, Lawyer Yi. Absolutely not, absolutely not. Yi Mulin hung up the phone decisively. Then, he took a few tissues to cover his nose and cursed in a low voice, "What the hell is this?" His temples were throbbing with pain. He let out a long breath and started the car. The car drove into Xingyuan Hospital. The legendary Qin Chen treated him. Qin Chen was wearing a shirt and a white doctor's robe outside. He was elegant and elegant. From time to time, the young nurses would secretly glance at him. So, Yi Mulan's head hurt even more when he looked at him. After the examination, Dr. Qin leaned against the desk behind him leisurely. "It's not a big problem. It will be solved with a proper sex life." Yi Mulan wiped his nosebleed again and glared at her. "I have a wife." Qin Chen smiled. "Your wife is with Cece. Take her away if you can." Yi Mulan was furious. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" Qin Chen had always been very naughty. He smiled and said, "Lawyer Yi, who is busy every day, is looking for a wife. I thought you didn't need a wife. Besides, you didn't ask me." Yi Mulan glared at her. "You said I'm fine, but I feel very uncomfortable. I need to stay in the hospital for a week." Qin Chen shrugged as if he had heard a fantasy story. "Lawyer Yi, don't waste public resources. Go and fight for money every day." Then, she smiled wickedly, "But no matter how rich you are, it's quite pitiful to not have a wife to warm your bed." Yi Mulan could not take it anymore and kept glaring at her. However, Qin Chen stood up straight and scribbled a note. "All right, go to the hospital. Also, our hospital has launched a package. It's 1 million for contacting family members. If we want to make it bigger and stronger and expand our media coverage, it's 10 million. Do you want to buy it?" This was simply a scam. Qin Chen was Yi Mulan's personal henchman. While Yi Mulan was thinking, Qin Chen was still smiling and said very wickedly, "This is my private business." Yi Mulan scribbled a set of numbers. "I choose the 1 million package." However, Qin Chen did not accept it. He sighed softly. "Lawyer Yi, you misunderstood. If you buy the package 2, you will get the package 1. Yi Mulan was so angry that his nose bled again. "Qin Chen, it's a pity that you are not a profiteer." Chapter 3385. Qin Chen said slowly, "There's nothing we can do about it. It's not easy to meet a fat sheep." She paused for a moment. "I heard that Lawyer Yi did a good job this time. You squeezed out your ex-girlfriend in this business negotiation and won a few billion yuan in one go. We don't have this kind of ability, so we can only rob the rich and help the poor." Yi Mulan's temples throbbed. He had long heard that Qin Chen was difficult to deal with. Today, he saw that he was worse than the rumors said. Fortunately, he became a doctor. If he was a lawyer, how bad would he be? Yi Mulan's face turned cold. He wrote another check and made a request. "I only want 1 package. Don't disturb the media." Qin Chen smiled lightly and didn't say anything. He just asked the nurse to take him to the ward. Yi Mulan couldn't stay idle in the ward. There was everything here. There was even a study. He made the best use of it and asked Secretary Li to send a pile of documents. When Secretary Li came over, she thought that her boss's brain must have gone haywire. "Lawyer Yi, you just don't want a divorce. You made such a big scene just to get your wife back. If you had the desire to live, you wouldn't be in the hospital now. Why do you need a divorce agreement?" Yi Mulan lowered his head to deal with the documents and asked calmly, "Did Lin Cece receive the message?" Secretary Li was a little stunned. "What message?" Yi Mulan was patient. "Go and ask Dr. Qin. She will understand." Secretary Li nodded. She had a bad feeling in her heart. Sure enough, she went to find Chin Chin. Dr. Chin first made a cup of tea for Secretary Lee and personally sat her down. Secretary Lee was used to seeing Lawyer Ye's good-looking face. It was reasonable to say that she wouldn't eat good-looking men, but Chin Chin, Dr. Chin, was really good-looking. His gestures were full of nobility. Yes, nobility. Her little heart was thumping wildly. She knew that Chin Chin was a woman. But at this moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was that Dr. Chin was better looking, more handsome, and more noble than any man. Also, that cup of coffee was really delicious. When Secretary Lee was fascinated, Chin Chin sat on the sofa and took a sip of coffee. Then he smiled faintly. "Oh, I forgot to tell you, Secretary Lee. I have already sent out the draft. Please rest assured, Lawyer Yi." Secretary Lee's heart skipped a beat. What draft? Lawyer Yi and Mrs. Yi want a divorce and now regret courting each other. Chin Chin smiled and said, "It's written by a girl who writes soft articles in our hospital. The writing style is pretty good. Lawyer Yi will be satisfied." Secretary Lee's jaw dropped. She thought Lawyer Knight would rip her jaw off. Sure enough, after she said it, Yi Mulin roared, "Chin Chen. That bastard." It was a pity that she had become a woman. Otherwise, she would be even more of a bastard than a man. She felt that there was nothing in the world that she did not dare to do. She knew that once this thing was sent out, it would throw a huge wave of stones at the White and Knight families. He did not dare to imagine what Bai Shuali's situation would be like. If she does not want to go home. Yi Mulin immediately stood up and wanted to find her. But after a while, he calmed down. Since things had come to this, why not just leave it like this? Secretary Lee looked at her boss's face and did not dare to speak. Chapter 3386. Secretary Lee carefully took the manuscript to him and looked at him eagerly. Yi Mulin took a look and accidentally had a nosebleed again. Secretary Lee hurriedly took out a piece of tissue to wipe it for him and then said carefully, "Do you want Dr. Chin to change it?" "Why should I change it? It has already been sent out. If I change it, do I still have face?" Yi Mulin glanced at Secretary Lee. Secretary Lee didn't dare to say anything and bit her lip. Yi Mulin wiped the nosebleed and waved his hand. Okay, you can leave now." Secretary Lee was still worried and said in a low voice, "Lawyer Yi, I'll go get some herbal tea to cool you down." Yi Mulin waved his hand impatiently and signaled her to leave. But before Secretary Lee left, he stopped her again. "Wait a minute." Secretary Lee turned around. Yi Mulin coughed softly. "Call Bai Shuali and tell her that my life is in danger." Secretary Lee blinked and said, "It's dangerous to be burned with desire." Yi Mulin glared at her fiercely. "Li Qinyu, do you still want to be a secretary? I'll be scolded even if I tell the truth." Secretary Lee whispered. Her careful and aggrieved look was actually a bit like Bai Shuali's. So, Yi Mulin was a little stunned for a moment. He just looked at her like that for a long time. Secretary Lee's little face turned red. "Lawyer Yi, although you are very rich, you can't be so desperate. What nonsense are you talking about?" Yi Mulin came back to his senses and said calmly, "Call her and tell her that I'm very sick and want to talk about the inheritance." Secretary Lee was scared. "Isn't that cursing yourself?" He rolled his eyes at her and she immediately went to make the call. After Bai Shuali received the phone call, she was silent for a long time. Secretary Lee thought that she would cry and shout to come over. After all, Secretary Lee thought that Bai Shuali still loved Lawyer Yi very much. Her eyes were full of pink when she looked at Lawyer Yi. After waiting for a long time, Bai Shuali just asked softly, "He is not dead, is he?" "What?" Secretary Lee cried bitterly for his boss in his heart. It turned out that he didn't treasure him as much as he thought. To think that Lawyer Yi thought about him day and night and even had a nosebleed. Secretary Lee thought for a moment and coughed lightly. It's like this. Lawyer Yi woke up this morning and was bleeding non-stop. He's now in the hospital. The rumors outside are a bit unpleasant. Bai Shuali was silent for a while before asking, "Am I here to sign a will?" Secretary Lee was crying in his heart again. Just in case. He might not really die. Nowadays, medical skills are very advanced. Bai Shuali nodded. Just when Secretary Lee felt that she didn't care about Lawyer Yi at all, Rice Worm asked in a hoarse voice, "Will he die?" Secretary Lee was stunned. Was she crying? For a moment, she was at a loss. She didn't know how to coax a girl. What should she do? On the other side, Rice Worm was crying sadly. As he cried, he wiped away his snot. "I'll be there in a moment." Secretary Lee finally heaved a sigh of relief. He still cared. She immediately went to the ward to report the good news, but as soon as she entered the door, she was stunned. Her boss was leaning in front of the bed. In front of him was a beautiful and big little nurse. Her boss had a nosebleed. Qin Chen was also by the door, taking a photo with his phone. Perfect. This photo is worth a lot of money. OPPE mobile phone, simple, super perfect, especially clear. Chapter 3387. Qin Chen came over and patted her shoulder with a smile. "Let's split it." Secretary Lee stared at her, his eyes fixed on her. Qin Chen smiled faintly and left with his phone. Secretary Lee's heart was still beating fast. At this time, the beautiful nurse came over and patted her shoulder with a smile. "Don't fall in love with Dr. Qin, okay?" Secretary Lee looked at her and the nurse smiled again. "Because Dr. Qin belongs to all of us." Waiting for her to leave. Yi Mulin put down his sleeves and said discontentedly, "How is this a hospital? It's simply a group of demons and ghosts." "Demons and ghosts, why are you still here?" Secretary Lee complained in a low voice. Yi Mulin didn't argue with her and asked indifferently, "Did you make the call?" Secretary Lee nodded and then looked at him carefully. "Lawyer Yi, Mrs. Yi said she would come in a while." Yi Mulin lay down immediately. "Look at me, do I look like a patient?" "Not really." Secretary Lee shook her head. "You look like a dragon horse. Like a beast, the kind that Yu Chio was not satisfied with." Yi Mulin rolled his eyes at her and didn't say anything. He asked her to bring the notebook over. He waited for a long time but Bai Shuali didn't come. Because Bai Shuali didn't have a taxi, it took an hour to take the bus from the apartment to here. So Yi Mulin endured for an hour and had a nosebleed twice. As soon as Bai Shuali arrived at the hospital, she was invited to Qin Chen's office by the nurse for a lecture. Of course, Qin Chen talked about it as Yi Mulin's attending doctor and spiritual mentor. After the talk, Bai Shuali came out as if she was covered with frost. At this time, Qin Chen sent a WeChat message to Yi Mulin. There were no words, only a photo. "Is it worth 10 million? Yi Mulin looked at the photo of him splattering blood in front of the nurse and almost vomited blood again. This was a scam. He immediately asked Secretary Lee to do it. Secretary Lee didn't feel distressed. Instead, she felt that Qin Chen was very powerful. Her boss had to work hard for a few months to earn a big case, but Dr. Qin specialized in dealing with these big bosses. Seeing Lawyer Ye's face was dark, he still wanted to pay. Bai Shuali pushed the door open and came in. She was dressed very plainly. Just like that night, she wore a white hooded tracksuit and a pair of black pants. Her sports shoes were also simple. They were not branded and were bought by Lynn Cece at a supermarket. It could be said that she was very shabby compared to her past. However, she seemed to be used to it. She walked in naturally and didn't feel that there was anything wrong. Yi Mulin felt his heart ache as he watched. When did she become like this? In order to divorce him, she really did not want anything. He smiled bitterly. You're here. Shirley bit her lip. I'm here to talk about divorce. Yi Mulin frowned. What did you say? Bai Shuali's voice was very low. I've asked Dr. Qin. She said that you might die. She also said, divorce is better than losing a spouse. If you die and we haven't divorced yet, it will be hard for me to find someone to take over. Yi Mulin glared at her and then 2 tubes of blood flowed down from his nose. He didn't care and continued to stare at her. Secretary Li, who was at the side, quickly helped him cover it with a tissue. Lawyer Yi, don't be angry. I said that you can't be angry, it will hurt your liver. Chapter 3388. Yi Mulin ignored Secretary Li and just looked at the rice worm. Did you come here just to say this? Bai Shuali looked at him with hot tears in her eyes. I don't know anything. Yi Mulin stared at her for a long time and then asked softly, are you here to take care of me? Bai Shuali didn't say anything but just lowered her head. After a long time, she raised her eyes. Yi Mulin, will you die? Although the words were not pleasant to hear, Yi Mulin still felt very happy when he saw that she was about to cry. He asked her softly, why do you ask that? Dr. Qin said that you would not stop bleeding and would die soon. The rice worm said Qin Chen's original words. Secretary Li was about to spit out blood. Dr. Qin took 20 million yuan. It was really impressive. However, wasn't Lawyer Ye's worm a little too gullible? The rice worm still looked at him with tears. After a long time, she said softly, Dr. Qin said that. Yi Mulin pinched his nose and looked at her again. It's not very good, Secretary Li's eyes were wide open. Was it really good for Lawyer Yi to do this? However, it was useful for a rice worm. As she watched, her tears fell. She bit her lips, and her white teeth almost broke her lips. She said in a soft voice, then why don't you let AI Wei take care of you? Yi Mulin gave Secretary Li a look. What kind of situation is this? Why are you still standing here? Why don't you get out? Secretary Li saw his look and immediately got out. She even closed the door thoughtfully. In the quiet ward, Yi Mulin washed his face and then said softly, she is not my wife. How can I let her take care of me? She has enjoyed your body, so she has to be responsible. The rice worm said hurriedly. Yi Mulin felt that his nose was itchy again, but he held it back. He gently touched his nose and coughed. So far, only you have enjoyed my body. Don't you think you should take care of me? She stared at him with tears in her eyes and didn't say anything. Yi Mulin sighed. Bai Shuali, are you still angry with me at this time? She seemed to hesitate for a long time and then said softly, what about the divorce? His heart skipped a beat as he listened to her. She was still thinking about this. So he smiled bitterly. Don't worry. If one day I feel like I can't take it anymore, I'll sign my name and set you free. At that time, you won't be a widow anymore. Really? She looked at him worriedly. Yi Mulin looked down. When have I ever lied to you? Rice Worm lowered his head. You said you were working overtime, but you were eating with AI Wei. You lied to me. For a moment, he couldn't find any words to refute. After a long time, he sighed. If you don't want to take care of me, then go back. I'll still sign the contract when I can't. Besides, I'll leave all my assets to you. Bai Shuali reached out her hand. I don't have money for a taxi. Can you take out 100 yuan from your inheritance for me to take a taxi? He glared at her. Did she just say inheritance? Did she really want him to die? Rice Worm probably knew what he was angry about, so he quickly corrected himself. I'm talking about property. Her tone sounded like she was acting coquettishly. Even Yi Mulan's heart fluttered a little, and all his anger dissipated. Chapter 3389. Now that she was standing in front of him, he realized that he missed her a lot. And he did hug her. Hugging her in his arms, he felt that she had lost weight and she no longer smelled like perfume. Instead, she smelled like herself. It was so refreshing that it made his heart ache. He placed his lips on her neck and murmured, Don't go, Shuali, stay with me. He buried his face in her neck and breathed in her breath. Only then did he know that it was hard to miss her. He missed her a lot. But Rice Worm misunderstood. She thought that he wanted her to accompany him for the last period of time. She recalled what Qin Chen had said. He said that Yi Mulan had a terminal illness and he probably wouldn't be able to recover. She should get ready. She didn't want to feel bad for him because he was so despicable and always forced her. He went to Hong Kong with Ai Wei and he used everything to make her sad. He only had money in his eyes. He was a lawyer who only cared about profits. She had nothing to miss. But she was still sad. Would such a strong man die? Her heart softened but she didn't say anything. Yi Mulan tightened his arms and stroked her hair. Shuali, I won't treat you like that anymore. I'll cook for you every night, okay? Bai Shuali's tears rolled down. You still want to cook in this state? She stayed silent for a while before saying softly, Give me 100 yuan and I'll bring Xiao Bai over. Yi Mulan couldn't believe what he had heard. He wanted to ask but she said again, I haven't forgiven you yet. We still have to get divorced. He looked at her and smiled. Okay. He took out 1,000 yuan from his wallet and gave her a taxi. But she only took 100 yuan and ran away. Yi Mulan looked at her quietly and his heart ached. Secretary Li came in and closed the door. Lawyer Yi, I saw Mrs. Yi crying and running away. Yi Mulan opened his laptop and paused. She thought I wouldn't be able to live for long and was willing to come to the hospital to accompany me. Secretary Li hesitated. That's not a good idea. I saw her crying. Yi Mulan looked at Secretary Li and said softly, Then you want me to give up such a good opportunity and continue living a life without a wife? Secretary Li only dared to mutter in a low voice, But you can't be so shameless. You'll be angry if you find out. Yi Mulan did not say anything. Because he couldn't resist the sugar-coated poison that Qin Chen fed him. However, he had been waiting for her for 2 hours, and she still hadn't returned. He was getting more and more frustrated, and he couldn't handle his work. No matter how he looked at it, he felt that this place was not good. Secretary Li just stared at the sky. You were the one who insisted on staying here. Instead of waiting for Bai Shuali, Father Yi scolded him. On the phone, Father Ye's words were very strict. Mulan, why didn't you tell us that you and Shirley had been fighting for so long? Do you know that your relationship is not only between the two of you, but also between the White Knight family? Yi Mulan thought that his father's position would be very firm, but in the end, he suddenly changed the topic. Forget it, we don't know what will happen in the future. Then he hung up. Yi Mulan's face darkened. Chapter 3390. Just as he hung up the phone, the door of the ward was pushed open. He thought that it was by Shuali, but it wasn't. It was Ai Wei. Ai Wei was holding a fruit basket in her hand. It was a very high-end kind. She was still the same as before, wearing a high-end suit and wearing the most tasteful perfume. Yi Mulin's face was still gloomy. He couldn't be bothered to deal with her, so he leaned against the headboard and asked, "Why are you here?" "I'm here to see you. After all, you're seriously ill, aren't you?" There was a hint of mockery in Ai Wei's tone. "What? Can't you let an old friend visit you?" "Lawyer Yi, you're very heartless to your old friend. You can make me lose the right to negotiate with just a photo. You can easily pocket billions of dollars. You must be very proud now. Why are you still in the hospital?" She smiled again. "Let me guess, it must be your wife who's making trouble." "Oh yeah, how could you let her see the photo when you did that?" Secretary Li, on the other hand, was amused. This time, she was on Lawyer Ai's side. Lawyer Yi was too despicable. He bullied Mrs. Yi like a child. It was really despicable for a man to use the beauty trick to achieve his career. However, when Secretary Li thought about the 100,000 yuan reward this month, she felt that Lawyer Yi was right. Yi Mulin glanced at Ai Wei. "If you didn't dress like that, would I have a chance to take advantage of you?" Ai Wei was even more furious. "You know that only I can keep you in check. Those foreign lawyers don't know you as well as I do. If it were you, you wouldn't be able to change the result. I just want to end it as soon as possible." Yi Mulin said impatiently. "Now, take your things and leave." Ai Wei was a little embarrassed. She didn't expect Yi Mulin to be so heartless. Yi Mulin looked at her and said softly, "Is it hard to understand? Think about what you said to Bai Shuali. Ai Wei, I don't need you to interfere in my marriage. I'll make it clear to you for the last time. No matter what happens between me and Bai Shuali in the end, I won't be with you." Ai Wei almost couldn't stand and her voice was trembling. "Is it because you're useless to me that you're telling me the truth? I thought you would understand me a little, and not think about me anymore. Ai Wei, being an old friend is far more relaxing than being alone, right?" He looked at her and smiled. From that moment on, Ai Wei understood that no matter how good she looked, how much perfume she wore, or how sexy her pajamas were, in front of Yi Mulin, she had no attributes of a woman. He had never taken her seriously, never. She was a little sad and didn't know what to say. At this moment, the door of the ward was pushed open. Bai Shuali was standing at the door. From her angle, she could not see Ai Wei. She only looked at Yi Mulin and said pitifully, "The taxi driver gave me 100 yuan, and I told him to keep the change. So when I came back, I had no money to take a taxi, and I took the wrong bus." His tone was as pitiful as a stray puppy's. Yi Mulin raised his eyes. His voice was a little hoarse. "That's why you only came now?" Nodding, she walked in and took out Xiao Bai. "But I didn't leave Xiao Bai on the bus. There was a time when she took the bus and fell asleep. Xiao Bai had forgotten about it. She chased the bus for 3 stops, and the skin on her feet broke. That was the worst moment of her life." Chapter 3391. At that time, she knew that she was nothing without the Bai family and Yi Mulin. She was homeless. After she said that, Ai Wei caught a trace of heartache in Yi Mulin's eyes. Ai Wei thought bitterly, so that's how it is. It was not that he was not interested in all women. At least, he liked Bai Shuali. Ai Wei smiled bitterly and was about to leave. At this time, Baishuali also saw her and instinctively took 2 steps back. Yi Mulin said in a low voice, Baishuali, if you dare to walk, I will break your legs and throw Xiaobai into the pot. Her eyes were filled with tears. Yi Mulin, I hate you so much. She turned around and left, but he caught her in 2 or 3 steps. He held her in his arms and looked at Ai Wei, I won't see you out. Ai Wei was completely humiliated. She was about to leave with a cold face. Baishuali said softly behind her, is she taking the fruit basket? Isn't she here to see the patient? Ai Wei resisted, Lawyer Yi doesn't want it. Rice Worm touched her stomach, I am hungry. I have been starving for half a day. Yi Mulin knocked her head, why didn't you say so earlier? It was already late when she came in the morning. Did she run back and forth for 2 hours with an empty stomach? She didn't speak and just looked at him. Ai Wei couldn't stand this kind of little rabbit, so she put the fruit basket into her arms, you can have it. She couldn't understand how a family like the Bai family could raise such a weirdo. She was supposed to be a tough character, but why did she come and go like a punching bag? Yi Mulin still pampered her like a treasure. When she left, she glared at Baishuali. Rice Bug watched as she slammed the door shut. Then, she opened the fruit basket and washed an apple for herself to eat. She then looked at him. Is she angry because she's embarrassed? Yi Mulin ignored her and asked Secretary Li to buy lunch. After Secretary Li left, he looked at Rice Worm who was eating the apple, can't you be a little more promising? Why do you eat people's food? He was so angry that Ai Wei's last look was to laugh at him. Baishuali said in a low voice while eating, I have already accepted it. He looked at her sourly, not daring to expect anything nice from her. As Baishuali nibbled on it, tears began to fall. Actually, it doesn't matter whether she slept with you or not. Anyway, you won't live for long. There's no point in fighting over this. He was both angry and amused. It turned out that all her magnanimity was because she thought he was going to die. He was so angry that he didn't know what to do. The girl who said she was hungry threw the apple aside and hugged his waist. She buried her face in his chest. Yi Mulin, I'll take good care of you before you die. I'll make sure your inheritance is worth it. She was so sad that her tears were falling. No matter how angry he was, he couldn't scold her. Moreover, it had been a long time since he had been hugged by her like this. He missed it. In his arms, Baishuali said softly, it's fine if you still want to have multiple wives before you die. I can get Ai Wei back. You don't have to be so depressed. Yi Mulin's face darkened and he pushed her away. She looked at him, tears in her eyes. Yi Mulin gritted his snow-white teeth. Before I die, I just want you to be with me. With that said, he hugged her in his arms again. This time, he seemed to have some ulterior motives. He kissed her and lowered his head to kiss her passionately. His intention was obviously to lure her to his bed. She wanted to reject him. But thinking that he was going to die soon, she held back and obediently let him kiss her. Her face was white and clean. Unlike before, she used to put on the most expensive skin care products every day. But because she was young, her skin was still very good. Moreover, she was less seductive and more innocent. Just looking at her, he was a little excited and wanted to hug her. He held her little face and looked at her carefully. His fingers caressed her delicate little face gently. His voice was especially low. Baishuali, have you missed me these days? Chapter 3392. She didn't know what to do being cherished by him like this. This was different from the coercion in the car last night. She looked at him, unable to say a word. After a long time, he sighed softly. But I miss you so much. After that, he kissed her again and carried her to the hospital bed. Seeing through his intention, she suddenly grabbed his hand in a daze. Yi Mulin, what do you want to do? But he still kissed her slowly. What do you think? Bai Shuali was scared and bit her lips. Let go of me, I don't want to. He looked at her and said softly, but I want to. She widened her eyes and looked very innocent. Yi Mulin, you're already like this. Why are you still thinking about such things? She seemed to have thought of something again. Is it because you're sick that you only have 1 minute? His face instantly turned extremely ugly and dark as he glared at her. Bai Shuali whimpered and said softly, I don't feel comfortable even for 1 minute. Why don't we do it? How could he continue doing it when she was like this? He turned over and was about to smoke when she immediately crawled over and took the cigarette away from his hand. Yi Mulin looked at her. Do you miss me? Bai Shuali wanted to get off the bed but was stopped by him. It seemed like he wouldn't give up until he got an answer. She raised her head and looked at him. Her eyes were misty and she lowered her head. It's useless even if I miss you. I can't even fill my stomach. What she said, he was angry and amused at the same time. He stared at her for a while before asking gently, so, you still miss me, don't you? She didn't make a sound. She just sat on the edge of the bed and shed her tears. Big tears dripped down and fell on her pants. She didn't wipe them away and just cried like a child. In the past, Yi Mulin wouldn't have liked such a crybaby. But now that she was his little wife, he seemed to like her. His voice became gentler. Why are you crying again? He reached out to take her tears but she pushed them away. It's none of your business. He smiled. Seeing her crying like a child, he felt a little sorry for her. Alright, don't cry. Aren't I right here? She was originally just crying, but now she started sobbing. I haven't even eaten a single meal you cooked. Why do I have to serve you while you're lying here? I'm still hungry even now. She bit her lips. Yi Mulin, I hate you. I hate you to death. His heart was filled with warmth and an indescribable feeling. If you hate me, then hate me. Alright, stop crying. He turned her little face towards him and gently wiped away her tears. Her eyes were red from crying, making her little face look even whiter. He was a little moved and could not help but kiss her again. He kissed her gently, his fingers still lingering on her little face. Her face was cold, but it was the most real feeling. The door opened quietly. Secretary Li stuck out her tongue at the door and retreated. However, Yi Mulin noticed her presence and called out to her, Secretary Li, bring the food in. His little worm had been hungry for a long time and was even angrier at him. Secretary Li nodded and entered. Bai Shuali was still in Yi Mulin's arms. She was very embarrassed. Yi Mulin, on the other hand, acted as if nothing had happened. He walked over and served her some food. Come, I haven't eaten either. Chapter 3393. Secretary Li was amused. Lawyer Yi said that he didn't have long to live. Why was he taking care of her now? Mrs. Yi was easy to deceive, otherwise, she would have exposed the lie long ago. Yi Mulin signaled Secretary Li to go out, and he took his rice worm to eat. She was indeed hungry, so she didn't refuse. Bai Shuali peeped at him from time to time while eating. He picked up a piece of potato for her. What are you looking at? She shook her head and continued to eat, but she started to cry again. Yi Mulin was a little helpless. He took a tissue and wiped her tears. You are crying again, aren't you? She was crying, and her little nose was red. She bit her lips. Yi Mulin, I will take care of you until you die. Originally, when he saw her little face and her red nose, his heart was a little swayed. He thought that it would be very interesting to bully her like this. However, after listening to her words, his mind suddenly disappeared. He stared at her. Are you here to take care of me or to piss me off? Bai Shuali raised her eyes and looked at him with tears in her eyes. She didn't quarrel with him, but just shed tears. His heart was in a mess. His heart was in a mess. Finally, he sighed. Well, I don't blame you. Don't cry, okay? She looked at him and stopped crying. The way she looked like she was about to cry made him want to kiss her. Yi Mulin, I always piss you off. If someone else takes care of you, maybe you can live for a few more days. She sniffled and said seriously. When she thought that he would die, the rice worm and rice became unappetizing. Yi Mulin was helpless. He could only coax her. Otherwise, what else could he do? After a long time, she finally believed that his death had nothing to do with her taking care of him. Then, she happily continued to stay and take care of him. She said that she was taking care of him, but what could she do? She couldn't do anything. In the afternoon, the auntie came over and hung up Yi Mulin's laundry. Of course, she hung it up for Bai Shuali as well. As she hung it up, she smiled and said, Madam, let me help you wash it. You didn't wash it very well. Well, the clothes inside were. It was a long story. Fortunately, Madam came out wearing clean clothes. Yi Mulin leaned against the bed and pulled her clothes. How is this clean? She sat on the bed and peeled an apple for him, whispering, This is Cece's dress. Don't you see it's a little small? After she said that, Yi Mulin's throat felt like it was blocked. It was very uncomfortable. After a long time, he said in a low and hoarse voice, Is it because you don't have the money to buy new ones? Seeing him like this, she seemed to realize something and said in a small voice, Many of my clothes need to be dry cleaned. I don't know how to do it, and I find it troublesome. Actually, Cece's clothes are pretty good and comfortable. Yi Mulin felt uncomfortable. He looked at her quietly for a long time. Then, doesn't she give you pocket money usually? Yes, she will give me a week's worth of food, but I will spend it all in one day, she said honestly. His heart was even more damp as he asked softly, Why don't you want it anymore? She looked at him and said in a very small voice, It's good enough to have food to eat while staying in someone else's house. How can you ask for this and that? It's not like he's your husband. Even though she would fight with Lin Cece for this, she knew that she was living under someone else's roof. She couldn't ask for things that she shouldn't. Chapter 3394. Bai Shuali looked at him. After I ran away from home, you and Ai Wei stayed in the same hotel in Hong Kong and were even photographed. You didn't explain when you came back and even signed the divorce agreement. He was silent and reached out to touch her head. It won't be like this again. You are going to die anyway. You won't have the chance to be so hateful. Then she lowered her head and didn't say anything. Yi Mulin was angry and distressed. When he was about to say something, her hand shook and she accidentally cut her finger. Blood suddenly came out. She was scared and cried in pain. It hurts. Yi Mulin was also a little surprised. He immediately took away the knife in her hand and pressed her wound. He said to Auntie Li, Call the doctor. Auntie Li thought that something serious had happened. She ran out and called Qin Chen and 2 nurses. When they came over, they found that the wound was only 1 centimeter and it was very shallow. Qin Chen bandaged it very carefully and joked, Fortunately, you called the doctor early, or the wound would have healed by the time I came. Bai Shuali was stupid and couldn't hear it, so she didn't think much. Yi Mulin could tell that the black-hearted doctor was teasing him. He glanced at her and warned her not to go too far. For the sake of the 20 million yuan, Qin Chen didn't argue with a man who couldn't satisfy him. He left with the two nurses soon. Bai Shuali lowered her head and looked at the wound on her hand. It still hurts. Yi Mulin's heart softened. He felt very comfortable when he saw her trying to be unreasonable here. It was more like he was taking care of her than she was taking care of him. He didn't need her to cut the apple. He finished peeling it and gave half to her. He couldn't help feeling sorry for her when she ate it. He wanted to ask her why Lin Cece didn't buy it, but he thought of the sentence, "Cece is not my husband," and swallowed it. It was also very beautiful to stay quietly like this. It was so beautiful that Yi Mulin was willing to stay in the hospital for the rest of his life. Auntie Li cleaned up and asked, "Lawyer Yi, do you need me to make dinner?" Yi Mulin thought for a moment. "No need. Just clean up in the apartment. Here. Shirley will take care of it." Auntie Li also felt guilty. "Lawyer Yi, I'm sorry, I didn't know." Before he could finish, Yi Mulin interrupted him. "It's nothing." The auntie had always been a little afraid of him. When he said that, she didn't dare to say anything more. Besides, the reunion of the young couple was better than anything else. So the auntie went back happily. The moment she left, Bai Shuali, the white rice worm, asked worriedly, "Auntie isn't here. What about dinner?" "I'll do it," he said calmly. Her eyes widened. He pinched her nose and asked carelessly, "Are you going to do it?" She didn't know how to cook. She didn't even know how to cook. She didn't say anything and thought for a while. "Who's going to wash the clothes?" He looked at her and slowly said, "You're here to take care of yourself. Don't tell me you want me, a dying patient, to wash your own clothes." Rice Worm hung his head. "You were the one who said that I would be fine as long as I stayed by your side." "You lied again." He was so angry that he cried. She was still in the right. Chapter 3395. However, the laundry facilities here were different from those in the Yi family and the apartment. The laundry needed to be dried by hand instead of being dried directly. She looked at him and said, "It's so troublesome. You are too stupid." He leaned against the wall and complained. He suddenly felt happy. It was precisely because of the existence of something as unsatisfactory as Bai Shuali in his life that he felt exceptionally happy. His expression became very charming. He was filled with happiness as he watched her walk around the balcony. When Bai Shuali turned around and met his eyes, she was stunned. She stood still, looking straight at him, her lips moving. "Why are you looking at me like that?" He smiled and stroked her face. She stared at him for a while and said softly, "How do you know that I am looking at you if you don't look at me?" After saying that, she felt that she was so smart and wanted to applaud herself. Yi Mulin smiled and moved his fingers to her lips. He said softly, "Yes, I am looking at you." Then, he kissed her again. He was afraid that she would struggle, so he held her arms in his arms and kissed her softly. It was very gentle and lingering. Bai Shuali felt dizzy. She felt that something was wrong, but she could not tell what was wrong. She opened her eyes wide and looked at his handsome face. For the first time, Yi Mulin was satisfied with his looks. He was sure that he could take advantage of her. This worm was not only superficial and did not know anything, but he was also quite interested in women. He thought of Mu Bai, Gu Changfeng and all the men she had pursued before. They were all very good-looking. Just thinking about this made his heart feel uncomfortable and a little angry. This kiss also became a lot more ferocious. She couldn't take it anymore and retreated step by step until she was pressed against the wall. Her back was hurting from the pressure. Yi Mulin kissed her for a long time before he let go of her and walked back to the ward without saying a word. Bai Shuali was kissed like this and he suddenly stopped kissing her. She would be angry too, okay? Uncertain, menopause. She bit her lips and said, if you are always angry like this, you will die faster. Yi Mulin was flipping through the documents and got angry when he heard that. Bai Shuali, do you want me to die faster? She remained silent and froze for a while. Then, she saw his ashen face. That's right. Whenever he was angry or unhappy, he would give her a hard time. What's so great about that? He was about to die and he was still begging her to take care of him. What right did he have to give her a hard time? She was clearly living a good life outside. She waited for a while, but his face was still dark. Her throat moved, and the sweet taste of blood welled up. In the end, she bit her lip, took the suitcase, and threw the clothes that the auntie had washed into it. She didn't know how to fold them, so she stuffed them into the suitcase haphazardly, tears falling as she did so. She didn't care about him anymore. She didn't care if he lived or died. They were going to divorce anyway. Yi Mulin heard the commotion and paused for a moment before asking hoarsely, what are you doing? Get out of here. She hung her head. Give me $100 for the fare. He stared at her. Why should I give you money? She looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. After staring at him for a while, she did not say anything else and carried Xiaobai out. Yi Mulin pulled her back. Bai Shuali, do you want to solve every problem by running away from home? Chapter 3396. Hearing her words, his heart softened and he sighed, why are you like this again? She didn't care and opened the door to go out. There was a loud noise behind her. Bai Shuali was startled and immediately turned her head to look at him. Yi Mulin fell on the bed with a painful expression on his face. The luggage in her hand fell to the ground and she ran over to support him. Yi Mulin. What's wrong with you? He covered his heart with his hand. It hurts here. She panicked. He grabbed her hand and rubbed his heart. Help me rub it. She had never thought that Yi Mulin would use such a low-level trick. Bai Shuali was such a straightforward girl. Although she hated him and wanted to divorce him, she couldn't bear to see him in pain. She rubbed his heart and looked at him with tears in her eyes. What's wrong with you? He looked calm and stared at her quietly. She didn't say anything. If you kiss me, I might feel much better. His voice was low and hoarse. Bai Shuali opened her eyes wide. Really? He smiled. Really? He had never thought that she was so gullible, but at this time, she really leaned over and kissed his lips. Do you feel better? Looking at her anxious face, Yi Mulin felt a tinge of guilt and softness in his heart. He seemed to have gone a little too far with her. He reached out and gently caressed her little face. His voice was low and hoarse. Much better. She looked at him for a long time before she realized that she was wrong. She was almost lying in his arms, so she got up in a hurry. I'm on top of you. Yi Mulin dragged her back and held her in his arms. Don't go, I'm sorry. She was silent for a long time before she asked softly, is it because you're seriously ill that you want me to come back? He smiled. So Bai Shuali also smiled. That's good, but you can't kiss me casually. She lowered her head and said in a low voice, I don't want to do it with you. If we have a child, I don't want the child to be born without a father. His face darkened and he stared at her. Bai Shuali didn't give in this time. She said softly, we've agreed to separate. He looked at her. So, taking care of me is my duty. Yes, if you think it's not enough, you can find someone else. Her voice was soft and firm. Yi Mulin looked at her. Actually, he realized that his millet worm had grown up and was different from before. He sighed and agreed, then took the documents into the study to deal with them. Bai Shuali bit her lip behind him. Are all terminally ill people as energetic as him? After a while, his voice came from the study, "Give me a glass of water." She nodded and poured a glass of water for him into the study. He was sitting behind the desk with piles of documents in front of him. She blinked. So many. Would he die before he could even finish dealing with it? Yi Mulin was concentrating on his work. Occasionally, he looked up at her standing at the door. Why don't you come over? Bai Shuali walked over and placed the cup in front of him. Then, she picked up the documents in front of him. You're already in this state, and you're still dealing with work. You have nowhere to spend your money. He glared at her. She was not afraid of him, but still glared at him. Yi Mulin reached for it, but she took a step back. I'm not giving it to you. Chapter 3397. Her back was against the door, and the man in front of her was like a beast. Surely, give me the documents. He coaxed her patiently. In fact, he was not angry. Work was endless, but she had just come back. She hadn't had this kind of fun for a long time. She held the documents stubbornly. No. She bit her lip and stared at him. If you continue to work like this, I will leave and not take care of you. These were childish words again. Yi Mulin was annoyed and amused at the same time. He reached out and gently pinched her face. Then tell me, if I don't work, will you accompany me? She opened her eyes wide and looked at him. He took away the documents in her arms and threw them aside. He reached out and picked her up. Accompany me to take a nap. She was a little messy in his arms. He was a patient. Wasn't he a little too strong? Besides, she was taking care of him, not sleeping with him. However, he was very strong. He carried her to the bed and didn't let her move. This was the first time they slept on the same bed after so many days. They didn't take off their clothes and slept together under the quilt. Bai Shuali didn't want to sleep with him, but her stomach felt warm and comfortable after eating. She fell asleep in his arms after a while. She slept soundly. Yi Mulin didn't fall asleep. He looked down at the little thing in his arms and smiled. She was taking care of a patient like this. It was more like being taken care of. He closed his eyes. There were always so many things to do. So he slept with her peacefully. These days, she ate and slept well, but he didn't have a good sleep. At this time, he felt very comfortable holding her and slept well. When he woke up, it was already dark, and the light in the ward was dim. If it weren't for the smell of medicine, he would have thought that they were on the big bed in his apartment. Yi Mulin woke up. When he opened his eyes, he saw her black and bright eyes looking at him in the dim light. Yi Mulin, I'm hungry. He felt a little funny. What else can you do besides eating? She didn't say anything. In fact, she could do a lot of things in the past. All kinds of parties. But she had no money now. She could do nothing but eat. She leaned against his chest and whispered, "You said you would provide food and shelter." He propped himself up, turned on the light, and stared at her. Your care is just for food and shelter. She also sat up slowly. What else can I do? He was furious. Can't you have some dreams, like saving me or redeeming me? I'm not a doctor. She whispered, besides, why should I get you back? It's all your fault. I've already decided not to like you. Yi Mulin felt that he was asking for it. Even if he wasn't sick, he would be sick from being angered by her. He stared at her for a long time before asking, "Do you want me to die that much? You were the one who said that I wouldn't be able to live for long, and I had no choice." She said in an infuriating tone, "No one cares if I live or die. So, why should I care about your life or death?" Yi Mulin asked softly, "Are these your true feelings?" She hung her head and said nothing, but tears fell from her eyes. It was obvious that he did not mean what he said. Yi Mulin did not expose her. He reached out and pinched her little face. "I'll cook for you." Chapter 3398. She moved closer, closer, until she was almost on his shoulder, and she did not know it. Yi Mulin glanced at her. "Idiot." Bai Shuali snorted, but she was still interested in this. "How do you do it?" Yi Mulin finished ordering the dishes and slowly put away his phone. "You need to go to Meituan and bind your bank card to it. But the prerequisite is that you have a bank card. Do you have one? Oh, you also need to have money in your card." No matter how stupid Bai Shuali was, she knew that she was being mocked and looked down upon by him. Tears welled up in her eyes. "Don't cry." Tears welled up in her eyes for a long time. Then she snorted. "You're not here anymore. These are all my inheritance." Yi Mulin was angered by her again. He lifted the quilt with a livid face and looked at the suitcase at the door. "Hurry up and dry it." Bai Shuali threw away her pride and face for a bite of food. She ran over and opened the suitcase. Then she bit her lip. "The clothes have changed." He walked over and looked down at the poor little dog. "You don't know how to wash them." She squatted there. No. He really doubted how she survived these days and how Lin Cece was willing to tolerate her. He reached out and pinched her little face. "You haven't improved at all." He was about to pull her suitcase when Bai Shuali suddenly hugged him. She hugged him tightly and stubbornly. She said softly, "Yi Mulin, don't die, okay?" His heart suddenly softened. "What's wrong? Didn't you want to share my inheritance just now? Why are you reluctant to let me die now?" She didn't say anything and just buried her face in his chest. She didn't want to admit that she couldn't bear to leave him. What she was willing to admit to him was that she couldn't bear to let him die. She couldn't accept it. Really, she didn't want to go back to his side, but she couldn't leave him alone. Yi Mulin seemed to understand her as she hugged him shamelessly. He let her hug him and slowly hugged her too. He thought he still understood her, but he didn't say it out loud. He just hugged her. He helped her wash the clothes, taught her how to wash them, and taught her how to dry them well and wear them as if they were new. He taught her a lot, but she hugged him and cried, very sadly. Actually, since she knew that he was going to die today, she had cried many times. She was afraid. She was afraid that the man she hated would die. She was afraid that if he really died, she wouldn't even have the chance to hate him. Yi Mulin reached out and patted her. "We still need to check. It's not certain that he will die. Look at how scared you are." She froze for a moment and then lowered her eyes. "If you have nothing else, I'll leave." He smiled and said nothing. At this moment, the delivery man came over. The young nurses at the door were whispering to each other. This ward cost 10,000 a night. Lawyer Yi was really using it to the extreme. She was using it as a hotel. Yi Mulin brought the dishes in and went to the kitchen to cook. She was watching by his side. She said that he would teach her and that she could cook for him in the future. He knew in his heart that all of this was built on the foundation of his illness, so this illness of his couldn't be cured. He had to think of a long-term illness that couldn't be cured, but couldn't be killed. They hadn't eaten together for a long time, so he made a few home-cooked dishes that tasted great. Baishuali was watching from the side. She wanted to help but was rejected by him. He hesitated for a moment. "Let me do it." He reached for her hand. Chapter 33:99. He cooked and ate with her. He was also the one who washed the dishes. Finally, Rice Worm was somewhat enlightened. He asked uneasily, "Yi Mulin, should I do something?" He looked at her and thought for a while, "Help me take a shower." In order not to give her a chance to refuse, he walked into the bathroom while saying that. Baishuali came back to her senses and ran in. "You can take a shower yourself," but she closed her eyes as soon as she opened the door. His clothes had actually disappeared. And he was so energetic. He didn't look like a patient at all. Yi Mulin said lightly, "I have to save my strength." "Why do you want to save your strength?" She put down her hands and bit her lips. His gaze seemed to be a little fixed. He looked at her for a long time and then said, "Baishuali, don't you know?" She thought of the things on the bed, so she leaned against the wall. "You shouldn't think about this kind of thing, and I don't want to." When she said these words, she didn't feel very confident. He laughed, "Baishuali, do you think I want to have sex with you?" Her eyes stared at him, and then she looked down. His body showed that it had been a minute, but he still had such a big interest in this kind of thing. "Come here." His voice was hoarse, "I'm talking about work." He stood under the water, closed his eyes and said softly, "Those work were done in the past, people should have the spirit of a contract." After saying that for a long time, she didn't say anything. He opened his eyes and looked at her, then said softly, "Come here." She still walked over slowly and took the shower gel to help him clean, one after another. He closed his eyes in enjoyment, and then said in a low voice, "And below." He was a little careless, and he was a little dissatisfied, but he didn't say anything. He stood straight and let her clean his body, put on the bathrobe, and fulfill the spirit of the contract. He left, and Rice Worm found that her clothes were a little wet, so she thought about it and took a shower. But she didn't have clothes to change, so she poked her head out and found that Yi Mulin wasn't in the ward. He should be in the study. So she went out carefully with the bath towel wrapped around her waist, found one of his shirts, and put it on. She wanted to wait for the clothes to dry and then wear it secretly, but she was so sleepy that she fell asleep as soon as she laid down on the bed. Yi Mulin was busy all the way until it was almost 12 o'clock before he returned to the ward. As soon as he entered, he saw that the person who had promised to take care of him was comfortably nestled in the bed, sleeping soundly. The room was dark, and she was lying there quietly. He couldn't help but take 2 steps forward, and then he realized that she was wearing his shirt. His heart skipped a beat, and he sat down to watch her. He wore a white shirt casually, with the top 2 buttons unbuttoned. From his position, he could see a glimpse of spring. His Adam's apple bobbed uncontrollably, which was extremely sexy in the dim light. He put his hand on her shoulder. After a moment of hesitation, he pushed her away. "You're sleeping like a pig." She woke up, rubbed her eyes, and looked at him in a daze. "Yi Mulin." His slender fingers caressed her neck. "Why are you wearing my shirt?" She immediately sat up and thought for a moment. "I don't have any clothes to wear." His fingers were still hovering over the button, and he let out a low laugh. "This is my dress, I have to take it back." After saying that, he moved his hands and feet. Originally, he didn't have such a plan, and he wanted to slow down. But she was dressed like this, waiting for him on the bed. If he didn't do anything, he wouldn't be a man. Chapter 3400. Bai Shuali's nose was red. She looked at him in the dim light. Yi Mulin, I don't want to. He lowered his head and kissed her. His voice was hoarse. Didn't you say that I needed 1 minute? Now I'll show you whether it's 1 minute or not, okay? Lawyer Yi was a man of his word. Many minutes turned into 1 night. The next morning, Mama Yi came over. She got the news that her son was hospitalized. As a father, he didn't have to come, but as a mother, she had to come. Yi Mubai also came with her. As soon as Yi Mubai saw Bai Shuali lying on the bed of the eldest son of the Yi family, he touched his nose and knew everything. Mama Yi asked the accompanying servants to wait outside and walked over to see the situation. Her sick son was in good spirits. He was leaning against the bed and reading documents. His little wife, who hadn't seen her for a long time, was sleeping soundly on one side with a tired face. Mama Yi knew her son's bad temper. She rolled her eyes at him. Shuali just came back and you're already like this. Don't you want a wife? Yi Mulin put down the documents and looked down at the person in his arms. He smiled. He got off the bed quietly. Let's go to the small hall to talk. Yi Mubai gave him a mocking look. Yi Mulin walked to the small hall and sat down. He took a sip of hot tea and said slowly, absence makes the heart grow fonder. Mubai, you don't understand. Yi Mubai took an apple and took a bite. What if Shuali and I really got married that day? What would you do? In fact, he thought about it and felt that something was wrong. His eldest brother really didn't like women. With his current status, it was impossible for him to like Bai Shuali. Although Shuali wasn't annoying, she really wouldn't make his eldest brother unable to let go of her. There was only one possibility, that was, he had liked her long ago. That was why there was a substitute marriage that day. Otherwise, why would his eldest brother make things difficult for himself? Yi Mubai figured it out and found it a little funny. His eldest brother was really coquettish on the inside. So in front of their mother, Yi Mubai exposed him. Eldest brother, I don't understand. We grew up together. When did you like Shuali? Not only was Yi Mulin stunned by his question, but Mama Yi was also stunned. Mama Yi was a little confused. Didn't Shirley chase after you in the past, Mubai? Fearing that Bai Shuali would wake up, Mama Yi deliberately lowered her voice. She had been steady and gentle all her life, and there were few times when she was like this. Yi Mubai's gaze fell on his big brother, who didn't look too good. He said slowly, that doesn't stop someone from secretly having a crush on you. Crush. Mama Yi froze for a moment. That eldest son of hers who seemed to lack 7 emotions and 6 desires? She looked at Yi Mulin and asked gently, is what Mubai said true? Yi Mulin held a cup of tea in his hand. He glanced at his mother and then at his brother. His eyes were a little fierce. Mubai, don't talk nonsense. Yi Mubai sighed. Big brother, is it so hard to admit that you like her? Yi Mulin lowered his head and gently played with the cup in his hand. He smiled. I didn't say I didn't like her. If he didn't like her, he wouldn't have broken so many exceptions so easily. Yi Mubai smiled mischievously. I'm talking about the past, before you got married. Yi Mulin was still unfathomable. Mubai, what are you trying to see? Chapter 3401. Mama Yi took a look and saw that it was Bai Shuali's ID photo. It was black and white and looked like she was in high school. So she asked, how did you get Shirley's photo, Mubai? Yi Mubai smiled and looked at Yi Mulin. It's in my brother's wallet. He seems to have used that wallet for many years. His voice became more and more teasing. Brother, you are really good at hiding. You can bear it. I'm really worried that if I marry Shirley, will you seduce her? It wasn't Shirley who would seduce him, but his brother. Mama Yeet said in a low voice, don't talk nonsense. Shirley is your brother's wife now. But to her surprise, Yi Mulin answered the question, if you don't like her, I will. Yi Mubai was stunned for a while and then laughed to death. Finally, he was driven away by Mama Yi. Mama Yi was angry and amused. Looking at her eldest son, she was proud and a little speechless. Now there were only two of them. She warned him kindly, don't bully Shirley anymore. I think she is, a little stupid, but very innocent. Yi Mulin frowned, Mom. You are bullying her. She is a few years younger than you. I know how strong you are. You are just like you when you are old. Who else would want to be with you if not for Shirley's temper? Women are willing to be with you. Who doesn't see the name of the Yi family and how rich you are? Otherwise, they would love you to death and cook for you because of your bad temper. Mama Yi could see through it. Only Shirley, who comes from a rich family, doesn't care about these things. She would rather go out and beg than be with you. Bai Shuali rubbed against Lin Sisi and called her a beggar in Mama Ye's mouth. She didn't feel good when she thought of her precious daughter-in-law being humiliated in someone else's house. She used to wash Shirley's underwear. Mama Yi said so many things but finally left. She couldn't wait to kiss her little wife again. After the ward was quiet again, Yi Mulin realized that his mother didn't seem to ask about his illness. But he soon got over it. Well, he made that rice worm so tired. It was not hard to imagine what was wrong with him. He was not in the mood to read the documents, so he went straight to the bed. She was still sleeping. She was probably really exhausted. He sat there and reached out to gently caress her delicate face. When he thought of how she had hugged his neck last night and begged him to end it over and over again, his heart throbbed and his body became restless. His Adam's apple bobbed, but in the end, he held it in and smiled. The days ahead are long. When Bai Shuali woke up, it was already noon. The smell of food wafted in the air. She sat up with a grunt and scratched her hair. She had also heard noises coming from the kitchen. It was Secretary Li. He was discussing something with Yi Mulin. It seemed that there was something that he had to deal with in the office. She couldn't hear it clearly. Just as she was about to go over, her phone rang. Startled, he quickly picked up the call. It was from Lin Sisi. She only came back at noon after a business trip. When she came back, she saw that the rice worm and the little tortoise were gone, so she called, Bai Shuali, where are you? Bai Shuali covered the microphone and bit her lip. I'm in the hospital. Chapter 3402. Bai Shuali quickly said, nothing, Yi Mulin is sick. I came to take care of him. Her voice was getting softer and softer. Sure enough, Lin Sisi sneered, what a good girl. Why didn't he ask Ai Wei to take care of him when he was sick? Bai Shuali, if you have any backbone, come back. It's worthless for a woman to give in so quickly. He will make trouble again when his wound is healed. Men's diseases are caused by spoiling. Bai Shuali's voice was soft, but he may not live for long. Lin Sisi stood at the door and sneered in her heart, Bai Shuali, are you in bed now? Rice Worm looked at the empty man's shirt and said nothing with guilt. As soon as Lin Sisi heard her silence, she knew what was going on. She sighed, do you think such a vigorous man will not live long? Bai Shuali, can you use your brain? She hoped that Bai Shuali and Yi Mulin could reconcile, but not in this way. Yi Mulin should lower himself and beg instead of lying. She would be tricked back in a few moves and give Shuali a candy to eat. If she was unhappy one day, she would slap her. This was very damaging. Bai Shuali heard that Lin Cece was angry and felt even more guilty. Can I come back? Lin Cece stopped her. No, you can stay here. Remember, come back when you are unhappy. I will take care of you. Bai Shuali was stunned and then said softly, Cece, I will work hard to take care of myself. Really? Lin Cece was stunned and then realized that she might have blamed her wrongly. Maybe she was soft-hearted, but her bottom line was always there. It was just that she couldn't see it, and maybe Yi Mulin couldn't see it either. She thought and suddenly smiled. Call me if you need anything. Keep the key and don't lose it. And, take care of Xiao Bai. Bai Shuali smiled and her eyes were sparkling. Sometimes, women's friendship was really unpredictable. They were clearly rivals in love, but now they were best friends. Lin Cece hung up the phone and called Qin Qin. After hanging up, she sneered. Sure enough, it was a trick. However, she didn't tell Bai Shuali because Yi Mulin was very busy. He couldn't stay in the hospital all the time. Just like now, Secretary Li came over and complained, there are a lot of things that you have to settle personally, Lawyer Yi. We can't make the decision. As she spoke, she watched Lawyer Yi cooking. It was really hard to imagine Lawyer Yi as a house husband, but now she saw it. Yi Mulin put the stir-fried dish on a plate and pondered for a moment. I'll go to the law firm in the afternoon. Secretary Li nodded and said tactfully, then I'll go back first. I won't disturb you, Lawyer Yi. She turned around and was shocked to see Bai Shuali standing behind her. She tried to recall if she had said anything she shouldn't have. Thinking about it, she realized that she hadn't. Then he greeted, Mrs. Yi. Then, he looked at Bai Shuali from head to toe. He was only wearing a man's shirt, and the exposed neck was full of hickeys, messy and warm. Secretary Li cursed in his heart, Lawyer Yi, this dying patient, was really good at acting. In this way, if he died, he would die in the hands of a woman. Secretary Li complained and left. Yi Mulin's gaze fell on Bai Shuali's face. After a while, he said in a low voice, go change your clothes and put on your shoes. The clothes are not dry. She walked over and hugged him. Yi Mulin, you still have to go to the law firm when you're sick. She saw that it was hard for him to cook, wash her clothes, and work. Was she too much? Chapter 3403. Bai Shuali buried her face in his chest. Teach me, and I'll make it for you. Yi Mulin's heart warmed a little, but after a while, he still asked her softly, Shuali, if I wasn't sick, would you still take care of me? She looked up at him for a long time. You're not sick. There was a hint of wariness in her eyes, and it was small and sharp. Yi Mulin sighed. Of course I'm sick. And very sick. After saying that, the wariness in her eyes lessened a little, but she still hugged him and refused to let go. Yi Mulin's expression softened, and he hugged her. Let's eat, huh? Bai Shuali looked around the ward and turned her head. Did Mom come here? Her words made him feel good, and he ruffled her hair. After dinner, he changed his clothes and prepared to go to the office. Bai Shuali followed him to the changing room and watched him change into a shirt, tie, and cufflinks. She looked at his neat appearance and frowned. You really don't look like someone who's sick. Yi Mulin looked at himself in the mirror, and their eyes met in the mirror. Then, he smiled and reached out to hold her shoulder. Believe me, I really am sick. He whispered in her ear. It's lovesickness. She was stunned, and he was half serious. Wait for me here. He raised his hand and looked at his watch. I'll be back before 7. After saying that, he pinched her little face and walked out with a dignified air. How did he look like a patient? Baishuali bit her lip and walked to the door. Don't you need me to take care of you? He turned back. Let's have dinner together tonight. I won't lie this time. Baishuali nodded. She was willing to believe him. After he left, she began to fiddle with those dishes in the kitchen, recognizing them one by one. Then, she searched for cooking methods on her phone, but she couldn't come up with anything even after an entire afternoon. Her little face even had 2 small bruises from being fried, and it hurt like hell. It wasn't until night time that she fried a pork rib. Although it didn't look good, it tasted good. Yi Mulin came back after 6, and he didn't look tired at all. After opening the door, he frowned. You went to the kitchen. Baishuali stood with her hands behind her back. Guess what I did? Yi Mulin looked at the kitchen behind her and smiled. Let me see. She didn't want to give it to him and insisted on him guessing. Yi Mulin didn't say a word. He walked over and put one arm around her waist. His other hand reached behind her and snatched the plate from her hands. Baishuali shouted anxiously, Be careful, don't spill it. It wasn't easy for me to blow it up. He took it and looked at it, then chuckled in a calm voice. She was always afraid of spilling it and didn't dare to touch it, but he still took it. A plate of charred ribs emitted a slightly burnt smell. You blew it up. She nodded and looked at him. Look, my hands and face are all burned. Her face was fine, but there was really a blister on her hand. She stretched it out for him to see. Yi Mulin watched quietly. He felt a little sour in his heart. Idiot. You're sick. I can't let you cook for me all the time. She looked up at him. See if it's good. His eyes were still fixed on her. She felt a little uneasy. Yi Mulin, do you think that I don't cook well? He shook his head and smiled faintly. No, it's because I'm happy. He hugged her, holding her with one hand and the plate with the other. He pressed her little head against his chest and said softly, I'll cook for you in the future. Don't touch these things. Chapter 3404. He looked at her. She raised her head and smiled. I have to grow up by myself, right, Yi Mulin? At that moment, his throat seemed to be blocked and he couldn't say a word. Her furry head was buried in his chest. Suddenly, she childishly reached out to hug his waist and threw herself into his arms. He whispered, Baishuali, you came back because I was sick, didn't you? She didn't say anything and just hugged him. After a while, she looked up. Try the ribs. What do you think? He smiled, held by her, and tasted a piece from the plate in one hand. It didn't taste good, but it was still edible. His eyebrows slowly relaxed and he pinched her face. It will taste better with some salt. She smiled. Oh. He went over to take the salt and sprinkled it carefully. He put a piece of ribs in her mouth. Try it. She looked like a puppy when she ate the ribs. He thought it was quite interesting. So he sat down patiently, took her in his arms, and fed her piece by piece. Baishuali ate piece by piece and unknowingly finished half the plate. She shook her head. I can't eat anymore. He smiled and ate a few pieces. Then he ordered food and a bottle of red wine. Of course, he didn't drink it himself. He was a patient and it was for the people who took care of him. Baishuali looked at the bottle of red wine and lowered her eyes. I've forgotten the taste of red wine. I won't drink it. She gave him a small smile. Her careful look made his heart ache. It was the best time to tell the truth and he could be forgiven. His lips moved and he was about to speak when his phone rang. It was his father who asked about him and Baishuali. He could tell that his father was worried and wanted to ask about it. However, Baishuali was beside him, so he didn't ask. He put down the phone. She had already run away and he called her name. Her voice came from the toilet. My stomach hurts. Yi Mulin thought about it. It was probably because she ate too many ribs. He knocked on the door. Can Baishuali come out? I'll take you to the emergency room. She refused and said angrily, it's all because you fed me so many ribs. Yi Mulin, I hate you so much. He laughed. Didn't you fry the ribs? Panting with rage, she said, then go away. It's none of your business. He laughed. It was funny, but also a little heartache and a little sour. After waiting outside for a while, he could hear her soft cries coming from inside. He could not wait any longer, so he pushed the door open and walked in. The rice worm was sitting on the toilet bowl, its face pale. His smile immediately disappeared. He squatted in front of her. Does it hurt a lot? Tears welled up in her eyes. Get out. Even if they were husband and wife, they wouldn't want others to see them going to the toilet, especially when they were in such a sorry state. She tried to push him away, but to no avail. Instead, he caught her hand. Put on your clothes and call me later. I'll come over and take you to the emergency room. Otherwise, I'll clean your butt myself. She stared at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. He smiled. I'll really do it. Baishuali was furious. She slapped his face with her hand and said, then go away. He smiled. You really want me to go? I want to put on my clothes. Her voice was weak. Chapter 3405. After walking out, he reached out and touched his forehead. Sigh, she was obviously a shallow girl who couldn't even take care of herself. Why did he care about her so much? She took out a cigarette and smoked it to calm her overflowing emotions. After smoking half a cigarette, she called out weakly, Yi Mulin. He put out the cigarette and walked in. She stood there trembling with a painful look on her face. Yi Mulin, I think my feet are cramping. Amused and annoyed, he carried her outside and placed her on the sofa. He squatted down to massage her feet. Her feet were very white, and every toe was beautiful. When he saw them, he would think of 4 words, pampered and pampered. He held them and was lost in thought for a while. Baishuali stared at his eyes and asked in a low voice, will you kiss me like a pervert? He smiled. Why would I? He got up and carried her. Let's go and have a look. She stopped him. I'm much better. I don't want to go in the middle of the night. Baishuali, I'm a patient. She looked at him carrying her and walking quickly. Is there a patient as strong as you? Yi Mulin thought for a while. I have an endocrine disorder. It has nothing to do with physical strength. Baishuali looked at him. Endocrine disorder, can you die? She looked like she didn't believe it. Yi Mulin wanted to tease her, so he deliberately put on a straight face. If there is no channel, I will die. Does burning with jade fire count? He thought that they had actually reconciled. He thought that his words had shown that the illness was fake. No matter how stupid she was, she wouldn't be so stupid. However, he neglected one thing, and that was that he was confused because of his concern. He had always been serious, and she had never suspected that he would lie. He carried her to the emergency room. It was not a big problem. She just had a stomachache, and she would be fine after drinking some water. When they returned to the ward, she complained that she was fine, and Yi Mulin just smiled. He went to the study to deal with some business matters, and she watched TV out of boredom. Everything was the same as in the apartment. At night, he came back and wanted her as passionately as last night. She pushed him with her fingers and whispered, "Can you still eat like this?" She grimaced and furrowed her eyebrows to show her agreement. He smiled and kissed her. Isn't that normal? She felt that it was strange. Wasn't he supposed to be the most particular? However, his strength was shockingly great. Throughout the night, Yi Mulin had half a push and half a give-in. It was close to 2 in the morning. Yi Mulin leaned against the headboard and turned his head to look at the little fellow who was sleeping soundly. She was exhausted. After 2 nights of ferocious lovemaking, he was a little out of control. He didn't know if it was because of the one-point incident that triggered him, or if Sister Lee's health stuff was too powerful. Either way, he was too fierce, and she kept crying. Tonight, he let her off the hook. She woke up in a daze. In the dim light, she opened her eyes and looked at him. Her expression was like that of a soft animal. His heart was also soft. He asked him softly, "Does it hurt?" She thought he was talking about her stomach, so she shook her head. "It doesn't hurt anymore." He smiled and slid down to kiss her. He held her little face and kissed her carefully. He kissed her until her toes curled up. She gently stuck to the side of his leg, looking very delicate and obedient. Chapter 3406. Her eyes widened as she realized why he asked her if it hurt. She nodded her head fiercely. He smiled, "You can't wait." He was going to do it for real. Rice Worm was so anxious that she put her little hand on his lips to stop him from doing it. Yi Mulin chuckled, "Didn't you say yes just now?" She bit her lips. No, I didn't say yes just now either. I said my stomach doesn't hurt anymore." "Then, does it hurt there?" he asked as he went over to check. She was pressed down by him. Her little face was red and her hair was messy. It was really tempting. And the process of him checking was really shameful. She grabbed his hand and said weakly, "Don't be like this." "Yi Mulin, take your hand away." Her voice was hoarse as if she was about to cry. No man could stand her like this. Moreover, they had been separated for a long time. If he kissed her, he would have to forcefully get his way. After that, she didn't make a sound and just cried softly. He hugged her from behind. "What's wrong? Weren't you fine just now?" She didn't move and whispered after a while, "Yi Mulin, you're not sick, right? You're lying to me, aren't you?" In fact, she took everything he said seriously. What really made her think that he was not sick was his wolf-like vigor. If he really couldn't live, he wouldn't be in such a good mood. His body stiffened for a moment. He placed his hand on her fair shoulder and gently touched it. He grunted in acknowledgement. Actually, he didn't act seriously when he said he had a terminal illness. She should have found out long ago. But this little fool only found out now. She lost her temper at him late at night after sex. She still had her back to him and sniffed, "I'll leave tomorrow." He frowned, "I thought we made up." "You're so hateful." She kicked him hard and fiercely like before. "Yi Mulin, you bastard. Get off the bed." He was such a proud man. How could he be kicked out of the bed by a woman? He restrained her in a few moves. "It seems that you still have a lot of energy. How about we do it again, She was so angry that she scolded, "Yi Mulin, you bastard. You're shameless. How about a different phrase?" He chuckled. She already knew anyway, so he didn't care about his reputation anymore. He could be as shameless as he wanted to be. Bai Shuali glared at him and slowly spat out 3 words, "Brother Fin." This thoroughly infuriated him. He grinded his snow-white teeth and said slowly, "Is that so?" In the end, he devoured her until not even her bones were left, a life worse than death, half alive and half dead. It wasn't until dawn that he finally let her go. She immediately curled up and said in a weak voice, "Are you satisfied now?" His body was satisfied, but when he saw her like this, he felt uncomfortable. However, men were usually willing to coax women after their bodies were satisfied. Hence, he hugged her and said, "Let's make up, okay?" As he coaxed her, he kissed her delicate little face and took good care of her. He even carried her to the bathroom for a fragrant bath. Bai Shuali was really exhausted. She felt that he was simply a beast, simply treating her as a tool to let out jade. Chapter 3407. Hit me then. She was furious. She sat up and unbuttoned her shirt. "Haven't you been cruel enough? Hit me again if you can." All of a sudden, he saw the boundless colors of spring. The bruises and the ambiguous marks showed how intense they had been just now. He was a little angry at first, but now he actually laughed. He reached out and rubbed her face gently. "It still hurts. Why are you teasing me again? Does it really not hurt anymore?" Bai Shuali looked down. "I'll leave at dawn." He looked at the sky outside. "It seems like it's already dawn." She glared at him and fell asleep angrily. He smiled and got off the bed to pour a glass of milk for her. "You probably can't sleep. Drinking some milk will help you sleep." "I don't need it," she said coldly and wrapped herself tightly with the blanket. "I don't want to talk to such a shameless man like you." He looked at her and said slowly, "Since I'm already shameless, I don't mind bullying you a few more times." She opened her eyes immediately. "Yi Mulin, what do you want?" He brought the milk to her lips. "Drink the milk." His tone was a little domineering and irresistible. Bai Shuali was stunned. She sat up and stared at him. Then, she took the milk and drank it in one gulp. He looked at her and didn't say anything. There were sleeping pills in the milk. She fell asleep quickly after drinking it. She was quiet and obedient. Yi Mulin looked at her silently for a long time. Then, he took the clothes for her and carried her out. When Bai Shuali woke up again, she was already on the bed in the master bedroom. The sun shone on the luxurious bed and it was a little dazzling. She covered her eyes and moved uncomfortably. The next second, she stared at her hand. On her ring finger, there was a huge diamond shining. It was the one she wore before. She was in a daze. Looking at the ring, she sat up instinctively. She was surrounded by a familiar yet strange place. The smell was also familiar yet strange. Xiao Bai was placed on the bedside table. Beside it was the credit card she had used before. The black diamond was 20 million a month. In addition, he put a check under the card. Bai Shuali picked it up and looked at it. 100 million. She stared at the number. There were so many zeros behind it. There were footsteps at the door. She looked up and saw Yi Mulin. He was fastening his cufflinks. They were made of black crystal, and they sparkled. He looked at her and said softly, "Get up and eat. I'm going to play golf with a client later. Do you want to go?" Bai Shuali looked at him and gently picked up the check. "What is this? Is it guilt, compensation, or bribery?" Yi Mulin put down his hand and looked at her silently for a while. He slowly revealed a smile, don't you like shopping the most? Yes, I like to buy. She flipped her hair. Shallow. Shallow people like to buy things. They spend a lot of money to buy a bunch of things they can't use. They don't even blink. They're the parasites of society. He walked in, bent over and kissed the corner of her lips. Don't talk about yourself like that. I don't like it. There was a hint of heat in her eyes. I'm also a flirtatious woman, and I like to hug different men. Yi Mulin, it's really not worth it for you to spend 100 million on me. Chapter 3408. She looked at him. I don't want to have children for the time being. He took out a small box of medicine from his pocket. It'll be effective for 48 hours if you don't want to have children for the time being. She held the small box, took out a small pill from it and swallowed it. Yi Mulin didn't say anything. Let's eat. He went out first. She washed her face and brushed her teeth. She didn't mention anything about leaving again. In the afternoon, she accompanied him to play golf. It was a heavyweight client, a big shot that Bai Shuali often saw on TV. The big shot also brought a female companion. She was about the same age as his daughter. She was definitely not the heavyweight wife. When they met, she looked at Bai Shuali and smiled at Yi Mulin. Madam is very beautiful. You should bring her out to socialize often. Yi Mulin smiled. My mother likes her company very much, so she seldom comes out. The big shot patted his shoulder. Young people should come out for a walk. After that, the two men went to play golf. Bai Shuali knew that the man brought a mistress, or a mistress, or a mistress. She didn't bother to pay attention to it. She sat under the umbrella and played with her delicate nails. She went out today in a white Chanel set with jewelry, just like before. However, she felt a little bored. The woman also knew who she was, so she came over and said a few words. Seeing that Bai Shuali ignored her, she didn't thicken her skin anymore. They drank and waited for 2 hours in boredom before the men finished playing. Then, they had dinner together in the high-class restaurant on the golf course. Of course, the conversation was still about work. An afternoon passed. When he drove her back, it was already 8:00 at night. She sat next to him absent-mindedly. Yi Mulin asked softly, What are you thinking about? Bai Shuali smiled faintly. I'm thinking about what Xiao Bai will eat tonight. He looked at her and asked after a moment of silence, Not happy today? Of course I am. She squeezed a smile at him. The dinner was delicious, and the husband next to me is also very outstanding. I have nothing to be dissatisfied with. But your face is full of desire and dissatisfaction. He whispered. What am I not doing well, Bai Shuali? She chuckled softly, You're pretty good, really. Yi Mulin, I believe that out of 10,000 women, at least 9,999 want to marry you, and the other one? He asked her calmly. Bai Shuali squeezed out a smile. Your mother. He looked at the night sky and the stars outside, and his voice was even more calm. Why do you sound like it's you? She lazily turned her face to the side and smiled mischievously. How could it be me? I'm already married to you. After that, he didn't ask again, and she didn't answer either. After they went back together, he went to the study, and she went into the room to take a shower and play with Xiao Bai for a long time. When Yi Mulin finished his work and returned to the bedroom, he saw that she was already asleep with the box in her hands. However, Little White had already crawled out. He bent over, picked up Little White, put it back into the box, and put it back on the cabinet by the door. After watching for a while, Little White also stretched out its head and stared at him quietly. She has lost weight, but you have gained weight. He smiled, took his bathrobe and went to take a shower. He should have let her go tonight, but thinking of what she said in the car, he didn't want to let her go, so he pressed her down. She woke up without much resistance, and just whispered, "Did you buy condoms?" He continued to do it unwillingly, but he still opened the drawer and took out the condoms. After that, she gasped and said softly, "When did you buy them?" Yi Mulin put one hand behind his head. "I bought them together with the medicine." He got up to take care of himself, and said lightly, "I can't let you keep taking medicine." She blinked and didn't say anything. When Yi Mulin returned to the bedroom again, she was still not asleep, and was playing with her phone. He lay down and asked, "What are you looking at?" Gu Changfeng came back, and I asked him when he was free to have dinner together. She said casually. As soon as she finished speaking, her sharp chin was pinched. He stared at her and said with a hoarse voice, "Bai Shueli." She looked at him. "You can come with me." He stared at her for a long time. "You can hang out with female friends." She lay back and bit her nails. "You don't like those friends of mine. But you don't need to hang out with Gu Changfeng." He pulled her into his arms and put her in his arms. "You can look for Lin Cece." She did not resist in his arms, but said coldly, "Do I have to get your permission to make friends in the future?" "It's not permission, it's to help you choose suitable friends," he said calmly, and then turned off the light and lay down. He said softly, "Sleep, unless you still want to come." As soon as he finished speaking, a pair of delicate arms wrapped around his neck, and she kissed the corner of his mouth. Yi Mulin stared at her in the dark. "Shueli," she said while kissing him, "isn't it too early to sleep?" She took out a box of condoms from the drawer, which was bought by him. There were 8 condoms in a box, and he used one. "Can you use all of them tonight?" Her eyes were shining in the dark. Yi Mulin looked at her. "Are you sure?" She chuckled in a low voice. "Yes." As soon as she finished speaking, he turned over and kissed her passionately on the lips. "As you wish." She did not know whether they used up the whole box, but he was very satisfied when it was over. She had no strength, so she softened under his body. She calmed down for a long time, and then whispered with her back to him, "No more." He smiled, hugged her from behind, and fell asleep together. Because of the indulgence of a few nights, it was normal for her to sleep late. When she woke up, she heard a strange voice coming from the living room outside. She got up wearing Yi Mulin's shirt, which he changed for her after last night. He seemed to like wearing his own shirt for her. It was very tempting to wear only a shirt, with her long, straight, and white legs. She walked out and saw 4 staff moving things into the apartment. They saw her coming out and smiled. "Mrs. Yi, these are gifts from Mr. Yi." Bai Shueli walked over and looked at the neatly placed gifts. There were dozens of Hermes limited edition bags, watches, and jewelry. Every one of them was expensive and glittering, which suited her temperament very much. She blinked gently to get rid of the moisture in her eyes. She looked up and smiled very reservedly. "Tell Mr. Yi that I like them very much." The staff smiled. "Then put them here. You can decide where to put them." Bai Shueli nodded and went out. Chapter 3409. After they left, she looked at the gifts and smiled faintly. Aunt Lee came over, wiped her hands and said happily, "Oh, there are so many good things. It's so dazzling. It must be at least 1,000,000 yuan. Lawyer Yi is really good to you, madam." "Good." Bai Shueli smiled and looked down. "There are at least 100 million yuan here." Then, she picked up a classic Hermes bag and gave it to the ant. "This is for you to buy groceries." The ant looked at the bag and said, "You want to buy groceries with such a good bag? How much does it cost?" Baishuali said casually, "More than 100,000 yuan. The auntie shrieked, "Madam, I can't accept that. I only need a cloth bag worth about 10 yuan for groceries. This bag doesn't look sturdy. If it breaks, I'll lose more than 100,000 yuan. Baishuali still gave it to her. "If you have a daughter, give it to her. She'll be very happy." The ant hesitated for a moment and accepted it. "Then I'll accept it. Madam, you're really a good person." Baishuali flipped her hair. "Move these to the room, I want to sleep for a while." The ant moved it happily. She looked back at Baishuali, who was very sleepy, and coughed. "Madam, are you pregnant? You don't look very energetic. If you're pregnant, you need to nourish yourself. By the way, I gave Lawyer Yi a very good nourishment last time. He had a nosebleed and was hospitalized for a few days." Baishuali sat up and looked at the ant. "No wonder," she said softly. "No wonder he was like a wolf in the hospital, as if his wife had died 10 years ago and he hadn't touched a woman." She lay down straight, and her movements were a little rough. The ant was frightened. She held her and said carefully, "It'll be dangerous if you're pregnant." Baishuali looked at the ant and smiled faintly. "Yi Mulin used a condom." The ant was stunned, and then her face turned red. "What do you mean by condoms? Young people nowadays really don't have any taboos when they talk." Baishuali looked at the ant's red face and couldn't help laughing. "Ant, what's wrong?" She pushed her and said, "Let me sleep for a while. I'm so tired." The ant ran quickly. In the afternoon, when Baishuali woke up, the auntie had already gone out to prepare food for her. After eating, she played some games for a while. Then, she went to the changing room to play with the jewelry that Yi Mulin had given her. After playing for a while, she felt a little tired and went out for a walk. He didn't go shopping as he felt very bored. He put on a casual outfit and went out to look at the flowers and plants outside, as well as the children in the amusement park who were led by young mothers to play outside. She suddenly remembered that she was actually 26 years old, so she wasn't young anymore. But she was still wandering around. Although she was married, she had never thought of having children, especially Yi Mulin. It wasn't that she hadn't thought about it. Back then, she had been foolish enough to discuss it with him. At that time, she felt that he was perfect in every way. He was mature, charming, successful in his career, and had great stamina. But later, she realized that if such a man didn't respect you, no matter how good he wasn't yours. At most, you were his. That was all. Baishuali watched quietly. Suddenly, she picked up her phone and dialed Yi Mulin's number. His deep voice came from the other side. "What's wrong?" Chapter 34:10. Baishuali said in a low voice, "Yi Mulin, where are you?" He seemed to be in a meeting, and his voice was very low. "I'll call you later, okay?" His voice was gentle. She knew that this was what he wanted to do to make it up to her recently. She didn't know why, but she wanted to cry. This wasn't what she wanted. She said, "Oh," and hung up the phone. She continued to sit there and watch those little children playing there in little dresses. She was a little envious. She thought that it was good to have children. At least there would be someone to accompany her. At least she wouldn't be so lonely anymore. As she watched, her eyes began to heat up. After about half an hour, Yi Mulin used the break in the middle of the meeting to call her. Because they had just reconciled, he spoke to her very gently and spoiled her as if she was his wife. What's wrong? Bai Shuali shook her head. Nothing. He said in a low voice, I'm in a meeting. I'm a little busy today. I'll try to go back earlier tonight. You don't have to come back to accompany me. I can eat by myself outside. Oh, I can also find friends to play for a while and go to the mall. I love shopping, don't I? Her voice was also very soft and a little absent-minded. Yi Mulin smiled. Okay, I'll be there. He raised his hand and looked at his watch. Go back before 8 tonight. Let's go back and have supper together, okay? She nodded. I'm hanging up. Someone is calling me. He wanted to say something else, but she had already hung up. Yi Mulin looked at his phone and was in deep thought. This time, she came back different from before. Although she still spent money to eat and sleep, it was really different. They lived in the old house of the Yi family. In fact, their relationship was very good. She would stick to him and act coquettishly with him. Sometimes, she would even take the initiative to hug him when they were sleeping because she wanted him to hug her and love her. She had high hopes for him. Now that she was back, they ate, slept, and made love, but there seemed to be something missing. It seemed that she had become extremely passive. Even if she was dissatisfied, she wouldn't say it like before. She would do whatever he wanted her to do and she would no longer take the initiative. Yi Mulin thought that they should still move back to the main house. With his mother accompanying her, she wouldn't be so bored and she wouldn't think too much. The most important thing was that she wouldn't want to get a divorce. He thought that it would be put on the agenda after a while. When he was free, he would bring her back to the apartment. Secretary Li came over to remind him of the meeting, and he put away his phone. The meeting lasted until 7:00 in the evening. He declined his subordinate's suggestion to have dinner together and drove back to his apartment. He thought that she would be at home watching TV, playing games, or soaking in the bathtub. However, after searching all over the place, they still couldn't find her. He frowned and dialed her number. The phone rang a few times before she picked it up. You're home. He listened to the stereo on the other side and frowned even more. Are you in a bar? Yes, is it against the law? She chuckled. Yi Mulin looked at the night sky and untied his tie tiredly. Where are you? I'll pick you up. She smiled and gave the address. Yi Mulin appeared there in less than half an hour. He had an aura of abstinence and was very eye-catching. He ignored the gazes and walked straight in. Chapter 34:11. Yi Mulin walked over calmly and said lightly, What's wrong? Bai Shuali looked up at him, her gaze a little indifferent. She supported her head and waved for the waiter to bring a glass of wine. She pushed it in front of him. Do you want a drink? He sat and looked at her quietly. I'm going to drive. She smiled. She leaned on the table and laughed a little exaggeratedly. After laughing for a while, she leaned on her arm and looked at him with one eye. Yi Mulin, look at you. You're always like this. You're always following the rules. You're not like me at all. We don't see eye to eye. How can two people like you live together for a long time? He held the glass of wine gently and rubbed his eyebrows. Will we have the same views after drinking the wine? She looked at him provocatively. He looked around and smiled. You're my wife. I have to take you home safely. So, you don't want to drink? She opened her eyes and stared at him. He looked at her and whispered, I'll ask someone to drink for me. Her eyes widened and she looked at him. He smiled and then held her head with one hand and handed the glass to her with the other. I'll carry you home when you're drunk. Bai Shuali was furious. I don't want to drink. Don't you like excitement? I'm cooperating with you. He raised his head and took a sip. Then he held her head and kissed her. She could feel the spicy wine being passed to her through the kiss. Every mouthful was spicy, and mixed with the man's scent, it was even more intoxicating. Just as the kiss ended, another kiss followed. 5 minutes later, he had fed her a glass of wine. When it ended, he licked his lower lip gently. Go home if you're satisfied. Her lips moved. Before she could say anything, he carried her in his arms. It was a princess carry. Bai Shuali was stunned for a moment and immediately hugged his neck tightly. She buried her face in his arms so that no one could see her. He looked at her. Are you afraid of embarrassing yourself? No, this is my place. She glared at him, but her eyes were filled with tears. Yi Mulin put her down. In a dark corner, he pressed her against the wall and kissed her. In the dark and gloomy corner, there were messy breaths and soft sounds of passion. Her hands tightened on his shoulders, wrinkling the expensive shirt, but he didn't care. He passionately kissed the girl in his arms. She was very disobedient. Unable to control her emotions, she whispered, Yi Mulin, do you want to do it here? He sobered up a little and stared at her. His voice was low and husky. Bai Shuali, be obedient. She lowered her eyes, and her long eyelashes trembled slightly because of her emotions. You've never seen me misbehave. She lifted her head. Let's do it at home, okay? He couldn't tell if she was drunk or not. If she wasn't drunk, why did she suddenly take the initiative and want him so much? His fingers moved downwards and bit her on the neck. He carried her out and got into the car, returning to the condominium as fast as he could. He opened the door, but he didn't even turn on the lights. He just appeared behind the door. He wasn't gentle, and she didn't need it. The alcohol burned everything. When everything cooled down, her voice rang out in the darkness, I want to lie down. Chapter 34:12. He was still pressing down on her. She was already in a mess while he was still acting like an elite. He reached out to look at his watch and mumbled, I've been busy till now and I haven't even had a bite to eat. Bai Shuali, are you trying to eat me up? She raised her head and looked at his angry face. Suddenly, she burst out laughing. She buried her face in the pillow and chuckled. Yi Mulin, you're blaming me for not eating. I didn't ask you to look for me. Whether you're happy or unhappy, it's all your own fault. He stared at her and suddenly reached out to pinch her chin while glaring at her. Bai Shuali, do you know that you're despicable? She was right in front of him, but she used her actions to show her disdain. She didn't even want to look at the gifts he bought for her. She just wanted to go to the bar and drink. Bai Shuali was still chuckling as though she was drunk. She looked at him and said softly, in the past, I always felt that we weren't compatible because you were too serious and I liked to live an extravagant life. But now, I know that it doesn't matter whether you live or not. You know how to spend money and you like to spend money. As she said that, she closed her eyes slightly. But, you bought so many things for me, but I don't feel happy at all. Tell me, what's wrong? Do I not like money anymore? She laughed exaggeratedly on the bed and bit her lips. No, it's the problem between us. It's not that you're too outstanding but I'm too lousy. Yi Mulin, look, when you're busy, I don't even know what I should be doing. I'm outside looking at other people taking care of their children. I'm even thinking if I should give birth to a child so that I won't be lonely. She looked at him in tears. I have no value. My only value is to give birth to a child, and my body. She put her arms around his neck. You like making love to me, don't you? If you don't like it, if you're not satisfied with my body, would you still give in to me like this? Would you still bring me home from the bar? Wouldn't you want to divorce me? Because I'm so lousy and worthless. How am I good enough for you? Between them, it wasn't a matter of whether they were compatible or not. In fact, they were not compatible at all. That was why there were so many problems. She wasn't independent. She used to belong to the Bai family, but now she belonged to Yi Mulin. It was only when she was slightly drunk that she dared to look into his eyes and tell him softly, Yi Mulin, I'm not happy. I'm not happy at all, she cried and closed her eyes. This place is like a cage. Our marriage is like a cage. You are more like a cage. Locking me up, I can't breathe. Only now did she realize that no amount of money could buy happiness. Only now did she realize that there was such a person. You couldn't match up to him just because you looked good. You couldn't enter his heart just by acting coquettishly. Maybe he liked you a little, but no matter how much he liked you, no matter how much physical contact they had, they would always be like two parallel lines that could never intersect. Yi Mulin lowered his head, his gaze locked onto her little face. She had fallen into a light sleep because of the alcohol. She could hold her liquor well, but she would get drunk easily when she was in a bad mood. Chapter 34:13. He held his forehead and suddenly smiled helplessly. When you're awake, you'll say that we don't have the same views again. He slowly got up and sat on the edge of the bed. After a while, he went to the bathroom to get a towel to help her clean up. After that, he covered her with the quilt and looked at her gently for a long time. After a long time, he got up and walked to the changing room to change his clothes. However, he saw that she had thrown the jewelry everywhere and didn't seem to care at all. He let out a long sigh and went back to pick them up one by one. After changing his clothes, he walked out and stood by the bed looking at her calm face. He stretched out his finger and touched it gently. His voice was unbelievably hoarse. Bai Shuali, what do you want? She was asleep and couldn't answer him. He stood there quietly and felt that the whole world was silent. After a long time, he went out and made himself a bowl of noodles. He smoked and ate the noodles. She was at home. It should have been full, but he still felt lonely. He wanted to wake that despicable woman up and sweat with him, but he couldn't bear to do so. Her face was a bit pale. He knew that he had been indulging in sex for the past few days. After eating the noodles, he sat on the armrest of the sofa and looked at the night outside. He sat there for half the night. At night, she screamed from the master bedroom. He immediately put out the cigarette and walked back. The bedroom was dark. She stood at the door of the bathroom and touched her forehead. It hurts. He walked over and reached out to hold her. He was annoyed and amused at the same time. How can you hit your head while walking? Bai Shuali, what did you eat when you were growing up? She immediately hugged him and put her face on his shoulder. Much cuter. It's more like it. He snorted but still hugged her and carried her to the toilet in the bathroom. Okay, tell me, will you drink so much next time? The last one. You were the one who fed me the last one. She sat there and closed her eyes. Why didn't the police arrest you for drunk driving? Yi Mulin sneered. It seems that they treat you too well. She hadn't gone to the toilet yet, so he carried her down and pressed her against the wall. She sobered up and widened her eyes. Yi Mulin, put me down. I need to go to the toilet. He pressed her down, looking like he had no intention of letting her go. Her eyes widened even more. Aren't you bored? I said I want to go to the toilet. I really want to go to the toilet. Beg me, kiss me again. I'll let you go. He smiled at her. She seemed to be unable to believe that the person in front of her was Yi Mulin. She struggled, you bastard, I won't beg. Then we'll just continue wasting time here. He smiled and took out a cigarette from his pocket. He lit it with one hand and took a puff. He even blew a puff of smoke on her little face. She felt that he was extremely bad. Biting her lips, she said, I really can't help it. I don't mind. He looked at her. Have you thought about it? She was so angry that her face was red from holding it in. He looked at her. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore and quickly kissed him on the lips. Her voice was like a mosquito. Please carry me over. Yi Mu bit Lin Yan's lips and carried her back to the toilet. She yelled angrily, get out. He smiled and walked out. He leaned against the door and waited for her. She didn't come out even after a long time. Instead, someone started to cry. She was crying very sadly. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.